Jack Reacher had no plans to visit Redemption Creek, Montana. The name on the bus schedule was the only thing that had caught his eye, a stark piece of irony he felt like investigating on a whim. He stepped off the Greyhound into the crisp, high-altitude air, a lone figure with no luggage and no destination. The town was nestled in a valley, a single main street flanked by buildings with fresh coats of paint. It looked clean, prosperous, and peaceful. Too peaceful. The silence wasn't calm. It was tense, like a held breath. He walked, his heavy shoes making no sound on the pristine sidewalk. The few people he saw, a woman sweeping her porch, a man polishing the chrome on a pickup truck, nodded, but their eyes skittered away from his. They looked, he thought, like well-fed sheep who knew a wolf lived nearby. He found the town's only diner, a place called the Silver Spoon. Inside, the scent of stale coffee and bacon grease hung in the air. He took a seat at the counter. A young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah approached him. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, black." She poured, her hand trembling slightly. Reacher took a sip. It was bitter and hot. Perfect. He scanned the room. A couple of ranchers in a corner booth, talking in low murmurs. An old man by the window, staring out at the empty street. On a corkboard by the door, among ads for farm equipment and a high school bake sale, was a flyer, a picture of a smiling young man, maybe 20 years old. The word "missing" was printed in bold letters above his face. David Miller. Last seen 3 months ago. The paper was clean, the edges sharp. Too new for a 3-month-old disappearance. "What's his story?" Reacher asked Sarah, nodding toward the flyer. The effect was immediate. The color drained from her face. The coffee pot in her hand rattled against a mug. She looked over her shoulder, a reflexive, terrified glance. He left town," she stammered, her voice tight. "Looking for work." "Flyer says missing," Reacher stated, not as a question. "The family's just worried. He'll turn up." She wouldn't meet his gaze. She was a bad liar. Reacher had seen better liars in federal penitentiaries. He didn't press it. He didn't need to. The fear rolling off her was a confession. Before he could finish his coffee, the diner's bell chimed. The man who entered was tall and wore a crisp sheriff's uniform. He had a folksy smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He moved with a quiet authority, his gaze landing on Reacher and staying there. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. He walked over and took the stool next to Reacher. "Don't see many new faces around here, just passing through?" "Something like that," Reacher said. "I'm Sheriff Brody," the man said, extending a hand. Reacher ignored it. "This is a quiet town. We like to keep it that way." "Looks quiet," Reacher agreed. "It is," Brody said, his smile tightening. "And we're not much of a tourist spot. The next bus comes through at 6. I'd advise you to be on it." It wasn't advice. It was an order wrapped in a pleasantry. "I'll keep that in mind," Reacher said. He finished his coffee, left a few dollars on the counter, and walked out into the unnervingly bright sunlight. He knew he wouldn't be on the 6 o'clock bus. Brody's polite threat had turned a whim into a purpose. He walked the length of the town, which took less than 5 minutes. He saw the name Caldwell Mining on the general store, the gas station, and the real estate office. One family owned the town, lock, stock, and barrel. As he turned to walk back, a gleaming black pickup truck pulled up beside him. 2 men got out. They were big but soft, their size coming from the bar, not the gym. "You're not good at taking advice," the driver said. He had a Caldwell Mining cap on his head. "I'm selective," Reacher replied. "Sheriff Brody is a reasonable man," the other man said, cracking his knuckles. "He asked you nice. We're not going to ask you nice." Reacher stood still, letting his pulse settle into a low, steady rhythm. He calculated the distance, the angles, the timing. They were amateurs, overconfident. The driver threw a punch, a wide, telegraphed haymaker. Reacher swayed back, the fist whistling past his ear. He stepped inside the man's clumsy momentum and drove a sharp elbow into his ribs. The man grunted, air exploding from his lungs. The second man charged, and Reacher met him with a front kick to the knee. The joint bent the wrong way with a sickening pop. The man screamed and collapsed. The driver, clutching his side, tried to recover. Reacher hit him with a quick, precise jab to the throat. Not hard enough to crush his windpipe, just hard enough to make him forget about fighting and remember how much he liked breathing. He left them both on the sidewalk, one writhing and one gagging, and continued his walk. The message had been sent, and he had sent one back. He'd kicked the hornet's nest. Now he was going to wait to see what flew out. He found a small, neglected park at the edge of town and sat on a bench, watching the sun track across the sky. He had nothing to do but think and wait. As dusk began to settle, painting the mountains in shades of purple and orange, a figure approached hesitantly. It was Sarah, the waitress from the diner. She was clutching a thin sweater around herself, though the air wasn't cold. "What you did," she said, her voice shaking. "To those men. Everyone's talking." "They started it," Reacher said simply. She stood before him, wringing her hands. "David, the boy on the flyer, he's my brother." Reacher said nothing. He just waited. "He didn't just leave," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "He was working for Caldwell Mining, up at the old silver mine in the hills. He was a computer tech. He said something was wrong, that the work they were doing wasn't mining." "What was it?" "He wouldn't say. He was scared. He said they watched everyone. He told me he was going to get proof and then we were going to leave. A week later, he was gone. Sheriff Brody said he saw him get on a bus. But my brother would never leave without me." Reacher looked at her. He saw the desperation, but underneath it, a core of strength. She wasn't just here to cry. She was here for a reason. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the first person I've ever seen stand up to them. Those men you beat up work for Silas Caldwell. He owns this town. He owns the sheriff. He owns everyone. But he doesn't own you." "What do you want me to do?" "Find out what happened to my brother," she pleaded. "Find out what they're doing up at that mine." Reacher thought about the bus, about the open road, about the freedom of having no ties, no responsibilities. And he thought about the fear in Sarah's eyes, the cold calculation in the sheriff's, and the clumsy violence of the thugs. Justice was an abstract concept to most people. To Reacher, it was a practical matter, an imbalance that needed to be corrected. Redemption Creek was out of balance. "All right," he said. The town turned on him overnight. The news of the fight had spread, but the official story, broadcast by Sheriff Brody, was that an itinerant vagrant had brutally assaulted 2 local citizens without provocation. A warrant was issued, but it was more than that. Reacher could feel it. The looks he got were no longer just wary. They were hostile. He was a marked man. He met Sarah at a prearranged spot, an abandoned shed behind the church. She brought him a map of the area, a bottle of water, and a small loaf of bread. "It's worse than I thought," she whispered, her face pale in the moonlight. "Silas Caldwell put a bounty on you. $5,000 for anyone who turns you into the sheriff. The whole town is looking for you." "Let them look," Reacher said, studying the map. It showed the town, the surrounding woods, and the winding road that led up to the old Northridge mine. "This mine, tell me about it." "It's been closed for 50 years, or so they say, but Caldwell's men are up there day and night. High fences, cameras, armed guards. It's like a fortress. David said they ran new power lines up there, enough to run a city." Reacher folded the map and tucked it into his pocket. A mine didn't need that much power. A data center did. "I'm going up there," he said. "You can't. They'll be waiting for you on the road. I'm not taking the road." He looked out at the dark silhouette of the mountains. They were his only option. He had to disappear into the wilderness, become a ghost. The hunt was on. But Reacher had been on hunts before. Sometimes as the hunter, sometimes as the hunted. He was comfortable either way. The line between the two often blurred. "Be careful," Sarah whispered. "Don't worry," Reacher said, his eyes already scanning the tree line. "They're the ones who should be careful." He moved under the cover of darkness, melting into the dense pine forest that bordered the town. The air grew cold as he gained elevation. The sounds of Redemption Creek faded behind him, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees and the occasional snap of a twig under his own careful feet. He was in his element now. No walls, no rules, just terrain and instinct. He knew they would come for him. Caldwell wouldn't rely on townsfolk with shotguns. Not now. He had shown he was more than a handful. Caldwell would send his best. Reacher found a high rocky outcrop that gave him a clear view of the valley and settled in to wait for the dawn. He ate half the bread and drank some water, conserving his resources. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he rested his body while his mind worked, planning routes, anticipating an ambush, turning the forest into a weapon. As the first light of day spilled over the peaks, he saw them. 2 4-wheel-drive vehicles winding their way up a logging trail below him. They stopped, and 6 men got out. They weren't locals. They wore tactical gear and carried high-powered hunting rifles with scopes. They moved with a professional efficiency, fanning out into the woods, their leader directing them with hand signals. Leading them was a man in his late 60s, tall and lean, with a weathered face and eyes that scanned the landscape with an unnerving intensity. This had to be Silas Caldwell. He wasn't just sending his men, he was leading the hunt himself. This was sport to him. Reacher felt a cold, calm anger. He wasn't prey. He was an objective. He watched them for an hour, studying their patterns, their communication, their individual habits. One man was a smoker, trying to sneak a cigarette when he thought Caldwell wasn't looking. Another was clumsy, making too much noise. Caldwell was methodical, patient. He was the real threat. Reacher slipped away from his vantage point, moving deeper into the forest. He didn't run. He just moved with purpose, making sure every footstep was silent, every shadow a potential hiding place. He let them get closer, deliberately leaving a faint trail, a bent branch, a scuffed patch of moss, just enough to draw them in the direction he wanted. He was leading them to a place of his own choosing. A narrow ravine choked with fallen trees and dense undergrowth, a perfect choke point. He set his trap, not with wire or explosives, but with gravity and a dead tree. He found a large, rotted log perched precariously on the edge of the ravine. It wouldn't take much to send it crashing down. He settled in a thicket of ferns, downwind, and waited. It took them 2 hours to reach the spot. They were moving cautiously, but their confidence was growing. They thought they had him cornered. The clumsy one entered the ravine first. Caldwell and 2 others followed. The last 2 men, including the smoker, stayed up top as lookouts. Reacher waited until Caldwell's group was directly below the deadfall. With a grunt of effort, he put his shoulder into the rotting log. It teetered for a moment, then plunged down the side of the ravine with a deafening crash, showering the men below with dirt and splinters. It wasn't meant to kill them, just to create chaos. And it worked. The men yelled in surprise, diving for cover. In that moment of confusion, Reacher moved. He burst from the ferns, circling around the top of the ravine toward the 2 lookouts. The smoker was so startled he dropped his rifle. Reacher was on him before he could recover, a single, precise chop to the side of the neck, sending him to the ground, unconscious. The other guard raised his rifle, but he was too slow. Reacher closed the distance in 3 long strides, grabbing the barrel of the gun and wrenching it away. He used the man's own momentum to spin him around, pinning his arms behind his back. "Drop it, or your friend's arm breaks in 3 places," Reacher said in a low voice. The man below, having scrambled free of the log, had his rifle trained on them. Down in the ravine, Caldwell was shouting orders. "Hold your fire! Don't shoot!" Reacher applied a little more pressure on the man's arm. The man gasped in pain. "Tell him to put the gun down." "Put it down, Matt!" the captive guard yelled. "He's gonna break my arm." Matt hesitated, looking to Caldwell for guidance. Caldwell's face was a mask of fury. This wasn't how his hunt was supposed to go. His prize was fighting back. "Do it!" Caldwell snarled. Matt reluctantly placed his rifle on the ground. "Now kick it over here," Reacher commanded. the man did. Reacher then shoved his hostage towards him. "Get him out of here, and leave your guns." He picked up the second rifle. "Tell Caldwell the hunt is over." He faded back into the trees, now armed with a long-range rifle and a scope. The dynamics had changed. He was no longer just the hunted. He spent the rest of the day moving parallel to the mine road, staying deep within the woods. He used the rifle's scope to watch Caldwell and his remaining men regroup. They were more cautious now, their arrogance replaced by a grim determination. They weren't giving up, but they had lost 2 men and 2 rifles, and they knew he was armed. Reacher knew he couldn't stay in the woods forever. His goal was the mine. He had to get inside and find the proof Sarah needed. He worked his way to a position where he could observe the facility. It was exactly as Sarah had described. A 10-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded the entire compound. Cameras were mounted every 50 feet. The main gate was manned by 2 armed guards. It was a professional setup. He watched the guard shift change at dusk. He saw the power lines Sarah had mentioned, thick industrial cables snaking down the mountain. An idea began to form. It was risky, but it was better than a frontal assault. He needed a distraction, a big one. He found what he was looking for a mile down the mountain, a primary power transformer station, a small fenced-in area where the main lines fed into the mine's private grid. Sabotaging it would cut the power, knock out the lights and most of the cameras, and create the chaos he needed to slip inside. He waited until the dead of night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. He bypassed the simple lock on the station's gate and found the main circuit breaker. He didn't want a permanent explosion, just a massive surge and a temporary outage. He wedged a metal bar he'd found into the mechanism, designed to short the whole system the moment the grid experienced a significant power draw. He then retreated back up the mountain, positioning himself near a section of the fence that was partially obscured by a rock slide. He took out the rifle. He wasn't a sniper, not by training, but he was a damn good shot. He found a large floodlight tower inside the compound, aimed carefully, and fired. The bullet shattered the massive bulb with a loud pop. A second shot took out another one. Lights started coming on inside the main building. Guards shouted. He had their attention. As he'd hoped, they activated the full perimeter lighting system, a massive power draw that hit the grid all at once. Down the mountain, the transformer he had sabotaged erupted in a brilliant blue flash, followed by a loud bang. And then, the entire mountain was plunged into darkness and silence. The hum of the mine's machinery died. The lights were gone. Emergency backup generators kicked on, but they only powered the main building, leaving the fence line dark. That was his window. He cut through the chain-link fence with a pair of pliers he'd taken from one of the guards' trucks and slipped into the compound. He was in. Inside the main building, chaos reigned. Alarm bells, powered by a battery backup, were ringing shrilly. Men were shouting and running with flashlights, trying to figure out what had happened. Reacher moved through the shadows, a ghost in their machine. He wasn't interested in the guards. He was looking for the heart of the operation. He followed the thickest conduits of cables through a maze of corridors until he reached a heavy, insulated steel door. It was a server room. It was locked with a digital keypad, currently dead with the power out, but the emergency protocol for such doors was always mechanical. Reacher found the manual override, a heavy lever hidden behind a fire extinguisher case, and forced the door open. The room was vast and cold. Even with the power out, the residual chill from the massive cooling systems was palpable. Row after row of black server towers stood in silent, monolithic ranks. This was no mine. It was a digital fortress. The air hummed with the sound of battery backup units keeping the core systems from crashing. He found what he was looking for in a small office at the far end of the room. The main administrator's terminal, running on its own uninterruptible power supply. The screen was alive with cascading lines of code. Reacher wasn't a computer expert, but he knew enough. He looked for directories, for financial records, for anything with a project name. He found it, a folder labeled Reclamation. It was a lie. It wasn't about reclaiming a mine. It was about reclaiming fractions of cents. It was a high-frequency trading and embezzlement scheme on a global scale. The program, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope, siphoned 0.011% of every transaction from dozens of international corporations they had hacked into. It was a digital parasite bleeding billions, a few dollars at a time, into Caldwell's untraceable accounts. And then he found another folder, this one encrypted, housekeeping. It took him 20 minutes of methodical guesswork, trying birth dates and local trivia before he tried the name of the town, Redemption Creek. The file opened. It contained personnel files and death certificates, forged ones, for 3 people, including David Miller. His file stated he had died in a car accident in another state. There were detailed notes on how he had discovered the reclamation project and had started copying data. The order for his removal was signed by Silas Caldwell himself. Reacher copied everything onto a small flash drive he found on the desk. He had the proof. Now, he just had to get out. As he pocketed the drive, he heard a sound behind him. He turned to see Silas Caldwell standing in the doorway, a large revolver in his hand. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across his face. He wasn't flanked by guards. He was alone. "I should have known you were more than just a common drifter," Caldwell said, his voice dangerously calm. "My men are fools. They were hunting a bear in the woods, and I let them. I should have been hunting a snake in my own house." "Your house is built on a lie," Reacher said, his body tense, ready to move. "My house is built on the future," Caldwell corrected him. "This is the new gold rush. Data, information, money that exists only as light and electricity. I am a pioneer. Men like your waitress's brother are just unfortunate necessities. Sacrifices for progress." "He was a kid you murdered." Caldwell smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "He broke the rules, and now so have you. No one is walking out of this room, Mr. Reacher. I'll burn this whole mountain to the ground before I let my life's work be exposed." He raised the revolver. Reacher didn't wait for the flash. He kicked a rolling office chair hard, sending it skittering across the smooth floor toward Caldwell. Caldwell instinctively flinched, his first shot going wide, smashing into a server tower with a shower of sparks. Reacher lunged, not at Caldwell, but to the side, grabbing a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. Caldwell fired again, the bullet ricocheting off the concrete floor near Reacher's feet. Reacher charged forward, using the extinguisher as a shield. Caldwell fired a third time, the heavy slug thudding into the metal canister. Reacher was on him. He swung the extinguisher in a low, brutal arc, smashing it into Caldwell's knees. The old man screamed and crumpled, the revolver clattering to the floor. Reacher kicked the gun away. He stood over Caldwell, whose face was contorted in a mask of pain and disbelief. "It's over," Reacher said. He left Caldwell on the floor, disabled, but alive. "Let the feds have him." He walked back through the darkened compound. The guards were still in disarray, a disorganized mob trying to restore power. He slipped back through the hole in the fence and disappeared into the night. He made it to the abandoned shed before dawn. Sarah was there, waiting, her face etched with worry. He handed her the flash drive. "What is it?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "Proof of what they did to your brother. Proof of everything. There's a name in a text file on there. An FBI agent in the cybercrime division. Send it to him. Use a public computer in another town. Then go home and forget you ever saw me." Tears streamed down her face, tears of grief and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "How can I ever repay you?" "Just get that drive where it needs to go," Reacher said. "That's payment enough." He turned and walked away without another word. He didn't look back. He followed a dry creek bed that led him away from the town and down to the main highway. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the valley. Behind him, the town of Redemption Creek was about to wake up to a whole new reality. Sirens would be coming soon. Federal agents, the news media. Caldwell's empire would crumble to dust. Reacher reached the highway. He stood by the side of the road, a solitary figure against the vast Montana landscape. A few minutes later, the distant rumble of a semi-truck grew louder. He raised his thumb. The truck slowed, its air brakes hissing. The door swung open. "Where are you headed?" the driver asked. "East," Reacher said, "for now." He climbed in, and the truck pulled back onto the highway, picking up speed. He didn't look back at the mountains that held Redemption Creek. He was already thinking about the next town, the next cup of coffee, the next stretch of open road. His work there was done.